Welcome, all you Chad nerds, all you space boys from the planet Soys. What's up? Got a lot of sass talking today on the internet, a lot of sassing. And as you know, when we got sass talkers, I always open it up to give the sass an opportunity to come and make their case, to explain to us why we should believe in whatever the position is, whether it's Roman Catholicism, Protestantism, Calvinism. Today is not about atheism, so we're not talking tag and atheism. If you call in about tag and atheism, I'm immediately going to skip you. We're not talking about random obscure topics. None of that is the topic today. The topics are actually conveniently listed for you. Catholicism, Protestantism, Libertarianism, Black Hebrew Israelites, Arianism, Jehovah's Witnesses, Muslims, Unitarians, Mormons, may all call in, Gnostics. Those are all acceptable topics. Basically, we're not talking tag and we're not talking atheism. We want to see if we can focus on getting the Protestants, the cults, the sects, the groups, the Unitarians, and even, of course, the Roman Catholics, because I'm more and more convinced that the best description for Roman Catholicism is actually a cult. It is an irrational cult that enslaves its people to a religion of dead works, lacking the power thereof, as Paul says, focusing their people on ridiculous superstitions, apparitions, visions, Fatima, when they inevitably encounter the theological contradictions that exist in the religion that are quite fundamental. For example, the top Roman Catholic apologist, and people were surprised that I said the top. I said top because, as far as I'm aware, he has the large audience following, namesake Catholic apologist. I mean, we could say Matt Fradd has a larger channel, but Matt Fradd doesn't engage in a lot of apologetics. He basically sits back, interviews people, and talks in his ridiculous Australian accent.
Oh yeah, I'm Matt Fradd. Oh yeah. I don't like Kiwis. I'm an Australian. Matt Fradd.
I'm just being silly. I do impressions of everybody. I know that Roman Catholics get their feelings hurt when I do that impression. But we had another doubling down. If you recall, some months back, I mentioned the word triad in passing. And Trent Horn assumed, as the original tweet shows, that he thought this meant something to do with Arianism. I said that, in our debate, you were incorrect by misunderstanding the fact that Abraham worshipped the Trinity. Trent thought this was mind-blowing. How? No. Natural theology teaches me that they worshipped a unitarian God in the Old Testament. And then he says, I asked if they knew that God was a Trinity. Jewish multiplicity in the Godhead could be akin to Proto-Arianism. No. In fact, the very point of why we would argue that the Old Testament teaches a triad is to prove that they were Trinitarian, Trent. So, as you can see, his initial reply is quite literally a fundamental misunderstanding of the basics that every Orthodox Christian knows by looking at the Rublev icon, that the Old Testament saints worship the triad. And Trent says, you even had to use the word triad to describe it, but you would say that modern people that worship triad, as in Jehovah's Witnesses, are not worshiping the one true God. So notice that very clearly, Trent didn't even understand the very common terminology amongst the Greek fathers, the Byzantine theologians, the very theologians who dogmatized and solidified and explicated the Trinity, Cappadocians, St. Maximus, etc. For Trent, he thinks this is somehow bound up with Arianism. Even though Trent attended, according to his own description, for many years, or presumably for many years, the Eastern Rite, The Eastern Rite hails Palamas as a saint, which actually makes no sense, given the fact that he was considered a damnable heretic for many centuries. And to notice that the most famous work that he has is called the Triads. A simple search would tell you that amongst the Orthodox world, Triad refers to Trinity. Now, does Trent simply say, oh, I misunderstood, you're correct? No, he doubles down because it shows that he's not even familiar with basic terminology in the very fathers that dogmatize the Trinity. Doubles down and says, no, this is an Egyptian term. What? The word can be synonymous with Trinity, but it's more common as a grouping of deities. Look at the 1996 Egyptology book from John Griffith. Now, the more common use is not something from an obscure Egyptologist, Trent. The more common use is what you should know from the uniate world and the Orthodox world of Triad, meaning Trinity. This is just silly. Now, Trent doubles down again and says that Old Testament Jews did not worship the Trinity. He says it right here. Did the faithful Jews who lived before Christ's incarnation worship God? If they did, then they must have worshipped the same God of the Trinity of the Christians, even though they didn't worship. Trent does not believe that the Old Testament saints worship the Triad, even though Jesus in John 5 through 9 says that they worshiped the Father, his angel, and his Spirit. So Trent doesn't even know that the Old Testament teaches the Triad. Now, I pointed this out at the time of the debate and after we had our debate, and Trent and other people tried to save face and tried to do damage control. He didn't mean that. He didn't mean that. He says right here, literally a few seconds ago, that they didn't believe in the Trinity. So do you understand that Roman Catholics do not understand the Trinity? And I don't mean in terms of an intellectual comprehension. I mean they fundamentally have ridiculous, stupid theology. And in order to save face and defend his natural theology a la Vatican II's Nostra Aetate, Trent is literally saying that they believed in a unitarian God. The very thing that I said was the problem in the debate. Trent still thinks that the Old Testament people believed in a unitarian God and not the Triad. So this refutes all of the Roman Catholic liars that sat here saying that that's not what Trent means. Why do you Roman Catholics feel the need to lie? And how could you be this silly in your theology to be so ignorant of the Old Testament? Again, proving my point in the debate that how would you argue against a Muslim? Do you not understand that to debate any Muslim requires going to the Old Testament to prove the Trinity? I even showed a video that was my opening statement in the Daniel Hakikachu debate to Trent, which apparently he hasn't watched because it refutes his stupid heresy. And Acts 17 in no way says that they worshiped a Unitarian God. It's just like this guy is on another planet and doesn't even understand what the debate is. And now the Libertarian says he can't hop on. Dude, I sent you the link. There's no reason why you can't hop on this debate. It's an open chat. You wanted to debate. Now you're saying you can't get on here. Give me a break. Here you are. You hopped on here. Now, all right, where's the actual video? I hope you guys understand that this means that Roman Catholics don't have the basics of the Trinity. I'm pretty sure the Trinity is a pretty important doctrine. And you just saw Trent say that in the tweet that he just put up The very thing that all of his defenders were saying he didn't mean. He says it again. Now let's remind ourselves of a few moments of the debate with Daniel Hakikachu, because it turns out Trent and Daniel have the same God, the Unitarian generic God of natural theism. Now, I know that Trent would confess to believe in the Trinity and the deity of Christ, but he doesn't understand that he's got two conflicting, contradictory positions in his worldview. And he doubled and tripled down in the last hour on Twitter on this. So I repeat again, did the Old Testament saints worship a generic Unitarian deity? The very thing that Trent and Roman Catholicism, Nostra Aetate, and Trent just now, within the last 5 minutes, reaffirmed? Or did they worship the Triad, as every Orthodox person knows? You understand that this is fundamental to us. And they're still wandering around, groping in the dark, like the pagans of Acts 17. Not understanding that it's a triad in the very beginning. Because their theology is all jacked up and dumb. That's why. Because they're in a giant machine that they have to make all of these pieces work and make this giant algorithm that's a giant bunch of contradictions fit together, and they don't. They don't even know what recapitulation is. They don't even know what monarchical Trinitarianism is, when it's fundamental in orthodoxy. So let's go back to how we would argue with a Muslim to refute Trent. Were the Old Testament Jews generic Unitarians? Let's look at Jewish scholarship explaining to us what they believe.
Which may cause some people some surprise, is that the Old Testament prophets were
Trinitarian. They were not Unitarian. Judaism, specifically in the Second Temple period, was not a monolithic Unitarian enterprise. The question becomes, what are the teachings of the prophets in the Old Testament? Did they actually teach, as Islam says, a radical Unitarianism? Or is it something more fluid, or is there differentiation in Yahweh? In fact, modern Jewish scholarship unanimously is undecided on this question. There's a lot of Jewish scholarship that is listed here. For example, Daniel Boyarin. Later, I have Sommer and I have Siegel. And they admit that in the Old Testament itself, not due to Christian deviation, but in the Old Testament itself, we find many, many passages that show differentiation in Yahweh. That differentiation is not just located in rabbinic debates. It also continues into later medieval debates with Jewish Kabbalah. And you can see there, for example, Gershom Scholem in his book on Kabbalah. He's the respected Kabbalist theologian of the Middle Ages, or scholar of medieval Kabbalah. He points out, for example, the three beginningless lights that are mentioned. Now, I'm not a Kabbalist. I'm just pointing out that this shows that the Jewish tradition is not monolithic in its presentation. So I'd like to come back then to my screen, to me here, and point out that the first display of Trinitarian theology in the Law and the Prophets is, for example, here on this whiteboard. And I'm showing this whiteboard because, hopefully you guys can see this. This is a tremendous amount of text.
Now, this list of texts that you see me post, if you've read Justin Martyr against Trypho the Jew, is Trent even aware that Justin Martyr argues from the Old Testament theophanies to prove the deity of Christ and his attempt at proving triad? It's like Trent's never talked to a Muslim or never read these church fathers. Oh, but wait a minute, Trent didn't know what the word triad meant. He thought it was a pagan anti-Trinitarian term when it's constantly used in the Eastern Church Fathers. So now Trent is doubling down, as we said, tripling down, that the Old Testament saints did not worship the Trinity. They worshiped a Unitarian God. Has he never read John 5 through 9? Has he not read 2 Corinthians 3, where Paul says that Moses looked face to face with Jesus? If no man sees the Father at any time, as Jesus argues in John to the Pharisees in John 5, then who was Moses talking to? This is the point of Jesus' argument to the Pharisees. I don't think Trent knows the Bible very well at all, and particularly not the Old Testament at all. I think Trent knows a lot of pop apologetics, because remember, Trent was not too long ago a deist who converted to Roman Catholicism. And so I don't think Trent knows the Trinity. I think he just accepts that the papacy got all this right. And that's why most of his debates are cultural issues or the papacy. I mean, maybe he's debated other topics. I don't know. I don't follow these pop Roman Catholic apologists because they're typically pretty low tier. But I mean, this is just sort of mind-blowing to me. What did we just talk about last night? We spent the first hour talking about Old Testament predictions of the Messiah. And when the Muslim called in, we started to go into various texts in Isaiah. And as I mentioned, there are more than you could even imagine in Isaiah if you haven't read Isaiah in a long time. It's called the fifth gospel for a reason. Trent, why would it be called the fifth gospel if the Old Testament teaches a unitarian God? Why is the Messiah said to be worshipped? Why does it talk about Yahweh, his son, his angel, his covenant messenger, and his spirit? All the way back in Genesis. Do you understand that Genesis teaches the Triad? Do you understand that when Trypho is arguing against Justin Martyr keeps arguing from Genesis and other passages to prove that? Who do you think Jacob was wrestling with? It's like these people have never read the Bible or something. But wait a minute. If we're talking about Roman Catholics, that's actually fairly plausible. Outside of someone like Scott Hahn, I'm starting to think that maybe they don't actually read the Bible. It's a closed book to them. As Paul says, it's a closed book to the Jews in 2 Corinthians 3. The very passage where it says Moses was talking face to face with Christ, that the Jews have the veil over their heart, it's almost like Roman Catholics and Muslims have the veil over their heart. Yeah, because they're facsimile fake religions. That's why. They're religions of dead works without the power thereof.
And I'm just citing these because there's too many to fit on a single screen there with typing it all out. You can screenshot this later and go check the various textual references here for just examples of theophanies. And the reason I've included the theophanies is that these are particularly useful for demonstrating the manifestation of Yahweh in the Old Testament, proving differentiation. So not just Yahweh, but also the angel messenger that he sends, who has the name of Yahweh, as we read in Exodus, the same angel that's present in the burning bush. That angel is spoken of as the messenger of the covenant. He's spoken of as, in Judges, turning the face of Yahweh towards Gideon.
Yahweh turns his face to Gideon. So are you noticing a pattern that the refutation of Muslims is becoming the refutation of the Roman Catholics? Because Trent's actually in a backwards way, backdoor way, correct, that actually you and the Muslim and the Jew do worship the same God because it's the wrong God. So Roman Catholics, Muslims, and Jews actually do worship the same Unitarian God, and that's the wrong one. So actually Trent, in a roundabout way, is actually correct. And why does he say that? Because that's the basis of his church's dogmatic teaching in Nostra Aetate, and he doesn't even realize that citing Acts 17 doesn't prove this. Citing Romans 1 doesn't prove this. He's just assuming that Acts 17 and Romans 1 teach natural theology, when Romans 1 doesn't say anything about syllogisms and a ratiocination process about syllogisms and coming to some conclusion at the end of a bunch of syllogisms about a generic God existing. Romans 1 says that it's on the heart of every man. It doesn't say anything about intellectual syllogisms. It's not talking about natural theology in your ridiculous church's sense. But Trent knows he has to defend Nostra Aetate, saying that he and the Hindu and all of them worship the same God. Isn't that interesting? The Hindu also is part of this natural theology process, and he thinks Acts 17 backs this up. All Acts 17 says is that God is the one giving these providential gifts to everyone, and yet he is unknown. The very point of the passage is that the God that they're after is unknown to them. And yet Trent is telling me, no, actually, at the end of a rational process, the pagan can reason out and come to, at the end of a syllogism. How many pagans are sitting there doing syllogisms outside of Aristotle? Let's be real here. Come on, this is preposterous. And even his own people, his own cohorts whom he's had debates with, are falling out like Tim and recognizing, hey, wait a minute, the Roman Catholic Church's post-Vatican II teaching on the Jews is a direct contradiction to the pre-Vatican II teaching on the Jews. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but it's also a contradiction when it comes to Muslims and Hindus too. You don't see that? The Catholic Church regards with esteem the Muslims. Oh, you mean the ones that you called crusades against in the Middle Ages? You esteem them? They adore the one God. What is the one God that's shared between a Muslim and a Roman Catholic when every Muslim will tell you that we don't worship the same God as you? There is no generic unity that is shared amongst an anti-Trinitarian group and a satanic group and a monotheistic group. If I believe that Satan is the creator of heaven and earth and that he lives and subsists in himself, am I then also esteemed by the Catholic Church with the Muslims? Do you see how stupid this is? And then it goes on to say, although they don't revere Jesus as God, they revere him as a prophet. Oh, so anti-Trinitarians. So now we can substitute Eunomians and Arians and Jehovah's Witnesses. The church regards with esteem the Arians. Does it? Because I'm pretty sure at Nicaea it calls Arius the mouth of Satan. So now we regard Arius as the mouth of Satan? I mean, as a true worshiper of the one God? Do you understand? Muslims are more removed than Arians are from Christianity. There are multiple attributes that Muslims don't believe in. They do not believe that God is immanent in the world. And maybe even some Roman Catholics don't believe that. Who knows? I mean, this whole Roman Catholic system is a gigantic mess. And you've noticed they won't come and debate anymore. All they're left with is why I'm a bad person. That's all they've had for the last 7 years, is how I'm a bad person. And yet they keep expanding in their carbohydrate intake. Have you noticed that Ibarra and Lofton are looking even fluffier? Well, I guess when the religion is no help, you take solace in the buffet and in dainties and pastries. But it's not just Muslims. Oh, whereas the Roman Catholic Church formerly talked very negatively in its liturgical practices about Jews, now they're the elder brothers. And they're part of the covenant? That doesn't make any sense. That's a contradiction to previous traditional Roman Catholic teaching. Now, where's the Hindu statement? Yeah. Now, remember, this is not saying that Hindus seek out and have a natural desire for the one true God, because we could say that all human beings have an innate desire for God, because we all have a nous. This says that in Hinduism, in other words, in the false religious system, the demonic system of Hinduism, and if you read Father Seraphim Rose's Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future, you can see very clearly that from the Christian perspective, this is a horrendous, terrible demonic religion. Does Vatican II say that? It doesn't mention anything about it being demonic. It says, in Hinduism, men contemplate the divine mystery and express it through an inexhaustible abundance of myths. They seek freedom from the anguish of human condition through ascetical practices or a profound meditation or flight to God with love and trust. God with a capital G. Did you read the first sentence? In Hinduism, in a completely demonic religion, Paul says that the gods of the nations are devils. David says the gods of the nations are devils. There's no better example of this than Hinduism. Vatican II says in Hinduism, they seek a flight to capital G God with love and trust. And then it says similar things about Buddhism. The deities of Hinduism and Buddhism are not the Triad. They are not secretly Jesus. If Jesus has a way to reach those people, he can do that. But it is not the demonic system of Hinduism or of Buddhism that is the means by which they reach God. And that's the bizarro language of Vatican II. And it's not just Nostra Aetate. The same stuff is said in Lumen Gentium 16. Because these liars will always sit here and say, well, we don't have to accept Nostra Aetate because it doesn't have the same level of authority as the other documents. You got to accept them all. And what a ridiculous system anyway, because it doesn't even tell you which documents are which. Every individual Roman Catholic has to figure out which documents are in which authority bin. The plan of salvation includes those who acknowledge the Creator. Okay, what does that mean? Does that mean I only have to acknowledge a generic idea of a Creator, like a Freemason does, or a theistic Satanist? The first amongst these is the Muslims, who hold the faith of Abraham. No, you don't hold the faith of Abraham if you're anti-Trinitarian. Have you read Galatians? The only way to be the seed of Abraham is in Christ. Because Abraham worshipped the Triad. Did you hear me, Trent? Muslims worship and adore the one God. No, Muslims do not adore God. You understand? Adoration is worship. So this implies that God accepts the worship of anti-Trinitarian groups like Muslims. Muslims hate the Triad. They hate Christ because they don't believe that he is deity, divine. And John says, if you don't believe that Christ is God in the flesh, you are a spirit of Antichrist. So this is saying that people who have the spirit of Antichrist motivating them to stamp out Christianity and the Trinity and the deity of Christ are part of the plan of salvation and also actually worship Christ. This is preposterous. This alone is enough to tell you that this is not the true religion. This is a departure from Christianity. And Trent and all the other frauds are defending this. And they will keep doubling down and doubling down and doubling down, because to admit that they're wrong on this means this whole system collapses. And Roman Catholicism is a giant cult. And they cannot accept that it is this blatant, this out in the open, and this fraudulent. And it is, because it's in everyone's face. This is why they act so. They act out so. This is why they spurg out. This is why they lose it. This is why they're calling you names and everything in the book. It's all a manifestation of the deep down insecurity and fear that they know about their papacy and what it does and how it acts and how deceptive it is. Now, on top of this, we had Francis. Let's see if there's anything else in this. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about this, and then we'll go back to the point about Francis's Skittles comment, which I'm sorry that you people can't figure out that Francis throws a bone to the trads about once every few years, and then he immediately walks it back. He's done this the entire time. By the way, all the post-Vatican II popes have done this very same thing, where They charge forward with 2 or 3 years of absolutely scandalous, rebellious behavior, and then they walk it back 2 steps. You walk 10 steps and walk back 2 steps. It's a very common Overton window. It's a methodology. It's a technique of bureaucracy and control. And then you throw a bone to the trads to keep them on the leash. And they all fall for it. All these people fall for it because they're naive and they're dupes. And so Francis says Skittles stuff, promotes Skittles civil unions openly everywhere, and then says supposedly, oh, but we don't want F in the seminaries. Oh, by the way, did he do anything about it, or did he just say something? Because the entire trad Catholic Twitter world is championing this like this is some great achievement. All you're showing is your own how foolish you are. Because he can talk all day long and throw you a bone all day long. Nothing changes. He's not doing anything. He could reform these seminaries. He has the total plenary authority of the Roman bishop, universal authority. He could excommunicate all of these erring bishops in one stroke of a pen. He doesn't do any of that. He throws you dummies a bone and you eat it up. And then tomorrow he'd be back to the revolution. And it wasn't even 24 hours before he walked it back and cucked his comments, as Luigi showed on his Twitter. So, by the way, as soon as I put up my tweet, I said, how long? Countdown to Francis apologizing for his comment. It wasn't even 24 hours. I didn't even get to put my tweet up. He was already apologizing before I could even make a joke.
Later, or we can go back to any of those. And so let me go back to my screen share here and point out that the triad there, I don't mean to argue either that the Old Testament explicitly uses the words triad. No, all that's necessary, as the Jewish scholars are admitting, is that the Old Testament believers spoke of Father.
Yeah, I have to address this because this is such a basic argument that's so dumb. Okay, it doesn't matter if the Old Testament saints use the word triad or not. They don't have to use the word Trinity. Okay, you understand? Whether it's Theophilus or whether it's Tertullian using the word Trinity in 150, 180. Okay, we wouldn't be so stupid as to say that nobody believed in the Trinity until Theophilus or Tertullian uses the word Trinity. Okay, you understand how dumb that is? When Justin Martyr argues for the Trinity, he uses the Old Testament text. That means he's arguing that the Old Testament teaches the Trinity. They don't have to use the word Trinity. Just like when you translate the gospel into Inuit, you don't have to use the word Trinity. Use whatever the Inuit word is for that. This is so dumb. And I can't believe somebody as intelligent as Trent, who is intelligent, is that he can't get this. Or that he doubles down on these foolish mistakes. It's bizarre to me. Which tells me this is a cult. Tell me what the difference is between Roman Catholicism and a giant cult. I don't see it. And once Father Moses said that the other day, I'm like, you know what? This is a giant cult. And they all act like total cult leaders. I mean, cult believers, I should say. Because they freak out and foam at the mouth and lose it when you start bringing this stuff up.
Angel of the Lord or Son of Man and the Spirit in a real distinctive way, and they do. Although,
I mean, imagine using the New Testament to prove the Trinity and then trying to say that nobody knows the Trinity until the word is used or until Nicaea. Do you understand how stupid that is? If we're using the New Testament to prove the doctrine of the Trinity, then it means the New Testament teaches the Trinity and the Old Testament. This is so dumb. I can't believe anybody would make this dumb of an argument. And by the way, it's actually the argument that Muslims make. Muslims say, Trinity not used till Tertullian. Tertullian used word Trinity. Invented Trinity. Invented at Nicaea. Trinity. You're using the Muslim arguments, Trent. Why are you people following these people? What is wrong with you people? How are you so deluded? How are you so confused? To follow, you have no discernment at all? You don't have a discernment to figure out the people pushing Stabby for years? Why would you trust their discernment on this stuff? I'm baffled. I can't understand what it is about you people that you find attractive about this stuff. Are you that low tier in your argumentation? What do you mean, you people? I mean, you people in the audience that follow Trent and Matt Fradd and Carbohydrate Lofton. Like, how are you that low tier? I can't understand. Help me understand. Come on the chat, please. Please come on and help me understand what is so convincing in these uber low tier Muslim level arguments from people like Trent Horn. I can't understand it. Help me understand, please. You don't see how low tier this is? I mean, I know a bunch of you have watched Sam Shamoun debate. And when Sam Shamoun debates, where does he prove the Trinity from when he's debating the Muslims and the Jews and the Unitarians? The Old Testament. And here's Trent telling you that, no, Jews didn't worship the Trinity in the Old Testament. The Old Testament saints worshiped a generic deity. Here's another Roman Catholic at least admitting that Trent is way off base. I'm Roman Catholic and Jay is right. I don't understand what Trent is doing. Trent can't admit he's wrong. And because to admit that he's wrong on something so fundamental exposes that Trent basically doesn't know fundamental theology. This is embarrassing for a Roman Catholic theologian and apologist. Do you see what he says right here? Faithful Jews, did they worship God before Christ? He says they did, but not the Trinity. There is no God but Trinity. So Trent triples down on the very mistake that I called out in the debate. Trent is a Muslim. He's making all the arguments Muslims make. Do you know how many times I've had Muslims? Last night, the Muslim that called in. What did he say? Oh, the Jews not worship Trinity. Don't believe in Trinity in book. Don't see Trinity. Oh, well, okay, I guess that settles it. Trent Al-Horn. Sheikh Trent Al-Horn. Follow the great son of Thomas Al-Summa Al-Abu Aquinas. I'm gonna start calling him Sheikh Trent Horn. What to do, Trent? What, Sheikh Trent Horn? That's when they start singing the Quran, you know. They're gonna like the Shias. They sing the songs to Ali. And they're going to start singing to Trent, to Abu Trent. Abu! Anyway. I don't know. So we're going to open it up. Somebody said Pearl is in Trent's harem. That's funny. Ali and Trent Horn.